What's up, everyone, and welcome into another episode of Goal Line Dynasty. Today, Tyler and I are going to be breaking down our top 25 Dynasty running backs, including a couple of rookies here in the offseason as of March 11th of 2024. But before we get into the video, Tyler, how we doing, buddy?
I'm good, man. I mean, at the time of this recording, we are in the middle of day one of free agency, so it's been obviously a crazy day. A lot's been changing, and yeah, clearly we're gonna see some movement in our rankings and all of that stuff. So it's an exciting time of the year. We're right before the rookie draft season and all that stuff. So it's a good time to plant our flag. 'Cause I'm assuming that these rankings probably won't really change until the rookie draft actually hits, but we do have the couple of rookies that made this list. So it's going to be fun to chit chat about it and go through it with you.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm looking at our rankings here, and it seems like our top 15 largely pretty similar. After that, between 15 and 25, we get a little bit all over the place. But you and I, we've never been a hive mind, right? You definitely have your way of going about rankings and playing Dynasty. I have my way about going about rankings and playing Dynasty. So it'll definitely be interesting to kind of break these down, but let's jump right on into it. So first and foremost, our consensus 1 and consensus 2, you have Breece Hall at 1. I have Bijan Robinson at 1. You have Bijan Robinson at 2. I have Breece Hall at 2, right? So for the sake of this graphic on here, I do have Breece Hall ahead of Bijan Robinson, but these are our 1A, 1B running backs here. And Tyler, I don't think this is going to come to a surprise for many people at all. I think for most people, I've seen some people with Jahmyr Gibbs at number 1 overall. We both have him at number 3, obviously there, right? But I think it's pretty typical to see Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson at 1 and 2. What would you say?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think many other people are going any other way about it. I mean, there was a little while where we had Jahmyr Gibbs. Like a lot of people had Jahmyr Gibbs over Bijan and was the RB1. There was a couple weeks there during the season, but I think it's a pretty consensus top 3, and the top 2 is pretty locked. It's one way or the other, either Breece or Bijan, and I'm not going to waste my breath arguing one way or the other. I just personally prefer Breece Hall. So that's just, I think he showed us that elite ceiling that he can finish as the RB2. We think now, obviously, Bijan just gets Kirk Cousins added to his offense. That's something that's changed now. So, I mean, we hope that ceiling goes up and he can get into that top 5 range. But for right now, I'll sit tight with Breece over Bijan.
I would even say Breece and Bijan are probably in a tier of their own. That might not sit right with people who are big fans of Jahmyr Gibbs, but Tyler, correct me if I'm wrong. I just don't foresee Jahmyr Gibbs having the same possibility of a workload as Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson does, right? Breece Hall, there's nobody that he's contending with for touches on that roster currently. And Bijan Robinson, the only one is going to be Tyler Algier, which with Art Smith out of there, Tyler Algier is not going to have nearly as many carries as he did last year. So I think Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson out of those 3, including Gibbs, right? They're the only ones that are truly going to see a workload, because the one thing about Jahmyr Gibbs, one of the guys that we have way down in our rankings here, but still in our top 25, David Montgomery is there for another 2 years. He's not going anywhere. Dan Campbell loves David Montgomery. Ben Johnson loves David Montgomery. The city of Detroit, they love David Montgomery. And because of that, because of the big workload that Montgomery is going to consistently be taking away from Gibbs, I would put Gibbs still at my RB3, but I would not put him in the same tier as Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson.
Yeah, and when I think about tiers, right, it's like, would I interchange these 2 players if I could just get a second on top either way? And Breece and Bijan, yes. But when it comes to Gibbs, for all those reasons that you said, David Montgomery is going to vulture. Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson, they have the touchdown, the goal line. They are going to be their goal line backs for their team. I mean, Breece Hall set a touchdown rushing record in college. Most games in a row with a rushing touchdown. He was their guy. At Iowa, and he is their guy in New York as well. He's going to continue to have that workhorse role. I think Bijan again will be the guy. I'm not worried about those first and second down touches that Monty might take, those 4 or 5 yard gains. Okay, those half a points you can have, but when it comes to the goal line work, I'm not comfortable saying that Jahmyr Gibbs has that same upside as the other 2 do. So I don't think you're out of the ballpark if you say that they're in a different tier, because if you offered me Jahmyr Gibbs in the second for Breece Hall, I think I'm saying no, I want something more on top of that, and that might sound greedy because of the running backs that we're talking about, but I do think that there's that big of a difference between the opportunity share that the 2 of them will have, or the 3 of them will have. So
Yeah. I think it makes a lot of sense to point that out. So when we're looking at these three guys, right? Because we've been kind of, I know we said Jameer Gibbs is in a tier below these guys, but we have been kind of grouping these three together. When you're looking at a potential trade, right? Let's say we're talking about a super flex rookie mock draft here. Now, I think anyone would probably easily take 101 over any of these three running backs. And I think you can make a real argument that just about anyone would easily take 102 as well, assuming Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison are going to be the top two picks. But when you're looking at pick 103, you got Jaden Daniels, you got Drake May, you got Malik Neighbors. Is there a world where you would consider flipping pick for one of these running backs?
me personally, that's not a move that I have made. That's not an offer that I've sent out. It would have to be so ultra specific to a roster that's just completely loaded with wide receivers. I've got 3 top 10 quarterbacks. I'm not worried about either way. Then like I'll send the 103 for my hammer running back if I have like a 0 RB build and it's just like, hey, I'm gonna be comfortable giving him the start every week, and then I'll make a decision. Just one of these guys has to start instead of two of them. You know, if that's the kind of build that you have, then I can understand it. Other than that, I'm not even really sending the top 5 pick. Like if I don't want to send Malik Neighbors for Brees Hall when I can go out and I can send the 2 in for James Conner. I can probably cheaper than that in some spots. There are people who I've seen James Conner be sold for a third. You can go to Fantasy Calc and see it for yourself. You know, I mean, there's so much cheaper running back production out there that I personally don't. Just the same way I don't invest high end draft capital on tight ends. I'm not going to do it on running backs. Really, I mean, we saw like I did it with Brees Hall in 2022, but that was no quarterbacks were there. I mean, it was I felt like he was a clear and away, like surefire thing over guys like Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, who I wasn't entirely in love with coming out. I mean, I'm one who I'll admit that I'm not like a lot of other people who say, "Oh, I had Garrett Wilson as the wide receiver 8 coming out of the drafts." Like I didn't do that, but yeah, in most cases, like I'm not even sending the top 5 pick for any running back in the world because I'll just buy one cheaper somewhere else.
Yeah, no, and that's a fair take. I kind of agree with you. I think 106 is going to be the earliest where I'm really looking to send away one of these guys, and that just comes to show. I mean, this time last year, obviously, Bijan Robinson was in the same class as C.J. Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Bryce Young. To a lot of people, it really wasn't a hot take. It wasn't considered this outlandish move to take Bijan Robinson at 101. And in fact, a lot of Superflex leagues did see Bijan Robinson going 101. And that just comes to show you that no matter how generational the running back seems on paper, he's still just that, right? He's still a running back. These quarterbacks are still going to have more value. These wide receivers are still going to have more value. And you're not going to be sad about having any of these three running backs on your team. But unless you're fully ready to compete and you have that 2-3 year window, it's not a bad idea to shop these guys around and see if you can get a top 5 pick, right? Or on the converse side, if you were looking to buy one of them, maybe start around the 105 at the very earliest. But let's move into our next tier here. So running backs four,
Can
five,
I add
and
something? Can
yeah,
I add something really quick? I don't want to cut you off, but I just want to say, like, it also comes down to this class too, right? Like, not every class has 4 quarterbacks taken in the top 11 that we're looking at projected right now, with 3 wide receivers also taken in the top 15. You know, like in a regular class, maybe like I would consider sending the 103, 104 for Brees and those guys, but in a class like this, I think it's just like there's too much gold in with that positional value that's at the top for me to want to spend, I guess, this year's pick. And things might change next year. Next year, we might be looking at a really strong wide receiver class. We don't think so right now, but things always change. And like next year, I might change my mind and say, no, I still don't want to send that top 5 pick for these guys. But right now, like the tier break too is like the 106, I would probably gladly send. You know, I would expect to have to put something on top of the 106, but then I wouldn't give up the 10. It's a tier break for me, and it has a lot to do with what's going on with this class. So I'll just add that in.
yeah, and that's a fair call out because I mean personally, with there not really being any big name quarterbacks as of right now for the 2025 class, there's not a whole bunch of massive, big name wide receivers. The 2025 class is going to be, or it should at least be, a good replenishment on running backs for the dynasty landscape. So if you're telling me that I have a perceived early 2025 first and I need a running back, even if I think that's going to be 103 or 104, to your point, I probably would shop that pick for one of these running backs because chances are top 3, top 4 pick next year, there might be 2 running backs in there, right? Just because of the landscape of what that class is looking like. But Let's move into tier 2 here. We got Jonathan Taylor at number 4, Travis Etienne at number 5, and Christian McCaffrey at number 6. Now, the biggest discrepancy that we have here is Christian McCaffrey at number 6. I have him as my RB4. You have him as your RB8. Now, it does seem like the consensus is more in line of having him as number 4 and number 5. So take me through your thought process on, putting him all the way down at RB8. Is it purely an age thing? Is it just the touches he had, the injury risk, kind of all of the above?
Again, in a normal year, like Christian McCaffrey would probably be higher than this for me. And honestly, during the season, like he probably will shoot up my rankings. But right now, when we see guys that are as explosive as Devon Achane and Kyron Williams right now, that like they have that age gap on him, it's like it would be hard for me to not push accept if someone was putting one of those running backs in my inbox for Christian McCaffrey. Like just hitting that reset button, hoping that they're going to give me, at least 80 or 90%, at least just for the next 1 or 2 years. Anything else on top of that is just a bonus, and that's what I traded them for. That being said, I don't hate Christian McCaffrey. I'm not willing to pay the price that you want me to pay to get him off of your rosters, but I don't hate him. He still is an elite running back, and RB8 does sound very low for him, but I wouldn't be able to send you Travis Etienne, the guy who just finished as the RB3, or Jonathan Taylor, who showed us at the end of last year, like he can be Jonathan Taylor again. And then Devon Achane can put up 50 points in a week, and Kyron, obviously, the Rams let him do everything. So, I mean, it is all one big tier for me right there, but I would have McCaffrey at the bottom just because of the age gap. I mean, he's got a lot of touches under his belt. I think that San Francisco offense could – I know it's a super team right now, but I think that they could get into contract trouble relatively soon, and it might not be that same offense that it is right now. That is all just projection, though, and conjecture at this point. But it does come down to the age. You called it out, and that's what it is right now. In the season, my mind might change, but right now, Christian McCaffrey is down there below these elite young guys.
So yeah, and you brought up Devon Achane and Kyron Williams. So let's go ahead. We'll round those guys into tier 2 as well. I'll go ahead and put them in this graphic. Let me explain why I have Christian McCaffrey where I do. One, there is no better producer at the running back position right now, right? We can project Breece Hall, we can project Bijan, we can project anyone in 2024. The fact of the matter is Christian McCaffrey's done it for the last, 3 to 5 years. Obviously, there's some injuries baked in there, right? But he did have multiple. He has had multiple RB1 overall finishes, and it doesn't seem like that's going to change, at least bearing injury, right, in San Francisco anytime soon. Now, the reason why I do have him so high is one, I would rather have him than anyone, like any running back that I have 5 or lower in a 1-for-1, I would easily take Christian McCaffrey. The reason being is because if you're going for a running back, you better be a contending roster. Even if it's Devon Achane, Kyron Williams, right? Even a rookie running back, right? You have a 3 to 5 year window with running backs. And if your contending window is projected 3 years away, you should not be housing any top 10 to top 15 dynasty running backs on your roster because there's a lot of value to be had in that. So if I'm going to sell Christian McCaffrey, I'm going to need something on top of JT because in my mind, that's an immediate tear down. Same thing with Etienne, Achane, Kyron Williams. I'd need something on top. Now, conversely, if I'm looking to deal away Christian McCaffrey, there's only 2 scenarios where I'm doing it. It's either I'm tearing down at running back and getting something pretty decent on top, or I realize that I'm not a contender and I'm trading him away for a top 10, top 15 dynasty wide receiver. I'm not expecting to go out there and be able to get Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase or one of those guys, right? But when I'm looking at receivers, you see AJ Brown, you think maybe Malik Neighbors, Brandon Ayuk, even Garrett Wilson. These are guys that you probably could fetch for Christian McCaffrey in a 1-for-1 trade because he is that highly touted, completely big game changer, right, for a top 3 dynasty team. So that's where I'm coming from with Christian McCaffrey. It's just if I have him, there's no other running back I'd rather have now. And if I'm selling him, I can use that as a selling point as well for the upcoming season. But enough about Christian McCaffrey. Let's talk about Jonathan Taylor and Travis Etienne here because we have Jonathan Taylor, your 4, my 5, Etienne, your 5, my 6. So we both are relatively high on these guys. Give me your thoughts on Jonathan Taylor.
So, I mean, I don't believe that we're going to see the, 400 something point season that we saw out of Jonathan Taylor, earlier on in his career. But I think we could see, an 80% of that, a 75% of that. And he showed us towards the end of last season, I kind of alluded to it before, that he can be elite again. When he's healthy, he did just get that long-term contract, right? He's got another couple years on his contract that he just signed. So I obviously love that about him. He's got the job security. I don't think, anybody is going to come in and touch that workload. I think he is the guy. He's one of the few running backs that's really a focal point of their offense. And, I'll say the same thing about Travis Etienne as well. People are saying that workload might be, reduced, but I think both of those guys are focal points of their offense. They're young enough to the point where I'm not saying, oh gosh, I've got to, contend right now this year and maybe next year. So I think that that's pretty much where they're comfortable at. And, the reality is that it's not hard to be a top 5, top 8 dynasty running back right now, because all you got to do is just have a job locked up. And then from there, like, it's just, can you catch the ball basically? Like, are you going to get the goal line work? So yeah, that's basically where I'm at with those guys. Job security, age, they show that they can be elite. Travis Etienne obviously just finished top 5 this year. So I think that they both show me that they can do it. And I think that there's not really going to be job competition coming in for them anytime soon.
Yeah, the one thing that's really intriguing about Jonathan Taylor, we have not seen him play with Anthony Richardson yet, right? Like, I think maybe it was week 5 when JT came back and Anthony Richardson went down. I think that was week 5. So we might have seen them play like a fraction of time together in this season. But early on in the season, even when JT came back, Zach Moss was still handling the majority, right? So it almost makes you wonder, what is this offense going to look like? We have a running quarterback in Anthony Richardson. We have a very highly paid running back in Jonathan Taylor with his contract extension. Obviously, they just went out, they re-signed Michael Pittman to a big multi-year deal, right? So the Indianapolis offense, and I love their head coach, right? I think that he's an offensive mastermind, and I think that there's a lot to like here. So, I mean, both of us have JT just over ETN, and I think for that exact reason, right, is he's got his big contract. Zach Moss is likely not coming back, and this offense is going to be firing on all cylinders. It's not out of the question to expect 1,100 yards and potentially even double-digit touchdowns for JT, and that's just on the ground, right? So he could have a pretty big year. Now, when I'm looking at Travis Etienne, there's a little bit of coach speak at this point in the offseason that's kind of concerning. Doug Peterson said he wants to kind of dial back Travis Etienne's workload. But I think that's going to change when they get into the season and they realize that Tank Bigsby is not a very good running back. Best case scenario, he can fall forward on the 2 or 3 yard line and call that a day, right? I think with the Jaguars losing Calvin Ridley, I know they brought in Gabe Davis. They have Christian Kirk. I think with them losing Calvin Ridley, there's no way that they can reduce Travis Etienne's workload, right? I still think he's a lock. Again, I wouldn't put him in the same he's not going to be a workhorse. He's still going to be splitting work to some capacity, but there's a lot to like about Travis Etienne, enough to keep him in my top 6 running backs there. So when we're looking at a trade for, let's say, Jonathan Taylor or Travis Etienne, we'll group those two together here. If we want to say, let's get a wide receiver equivalent of one of these guys, realistically, what do you think is the top name that you could fetch for one of these guys in a 1-for-1 in the trade market?
Well, if we went and looked at our wide receiver rankings here, I would say, like, you can get your hands on definitely, like, I think Michael Pittman, Chris Olave, Jordan Addison range. I think you can get your hands on top 15 guys. I think that, like, that name value, like, running back is so scarce right now that if you want to trade for one of these names, you have to give up a top 15, a top 20, dynasty wide receiver. You're not going to get them any cheaper than that, really, because they're the ones with jobs, and there's not a lot of security around the league right now. Even with free agency kind of, settling some dust, you still don't feel great about, having Austin Eckler with the Commanders. Like, you don't feel wonderful about that. Or, like, even like Josh Jacobs with the Packers. Like, it could be, you hope that it's going to be what it was in the past. Like, there's not a lot of guys who are going into the same situation that they were in last year. So if you want that consistency and that kind of a lock of a bet, then you got to pay that price. And so I think I would probably pay someone, like, if Michael Pittman Jr. was my, wide receiver 3 or 4 on my roster, and I needed a running back. Maybe not in March, but come August, September, like, that's going to be a move that I'm going to be willing to make in certain spots. So
yeah, and I think people become more desperate for running backs as we get a little closer to the actual NFL season, right? Because right now everyone has the philosophy, well, wide receivers, they have the most longevity outside of quarterbacks. So let's just build our team through quarterbacks and wide receivers. Then we get to August, we're 2 weeks away from the season. We say, well, shit, our best running back on our entire roster right now is James Conner. What are we going to do with that, right? And so that's where you can kind of catch people lacking. So I completely agree. I think it's not exactly a seller's market for running backs. At least not until the summer, right? Once training camp picks up and people are starting to get more in the swing of things of like, hey, the actual season's coming up, that's when it's a good time to sell running backs. But right now, it's a risky time to buy running backs because obviously we have free agency going on. Obviously, the NFL draft is in about 6 weeks, but it's not a bad idea to kind of kick the tires on some of these high value running backs. Like obviously outside of that top tier with Brees Hall, Bijan Robinson, and Jameer Gibbs, the rest of these guys on this list should be relatively affordable at this point in the offseason. But before we move into that next tier, let's briefly bring up A-Chain and Kyron Williams. So I've seen some people have either of these guys in their top 5 dynasty rankings, and I have them pretty low at 8 and 9. You're just outside of the top 5 with number 6 and 7. I'll give you my high level overview as to why I have these guys in the lower part of my top 10. I'll start with Kyron Williams because I have him at rank 8. The reason why, dude, he already missed some time last year. He's a smaller guy. I know some people were saying that about Christian McCaffrey, but Kyron Williams is not built like Christian McCaffrey. And it's just, there's some concern here, right? There's injury risk. There is, can he actually handle a workload over such a long amount of time? There is, the Rams. The Rams personnel has changed, right? Matt Stafford's getting older. Cooper Kupp is getting older. This offense is transforming. And it feels like a one-hit wonder to me, right? Like Kyron Williams, in my opinion, is like my biggest dynasty sell right now because I think you could get multiple picks for him because he had such a big 2023 workload. Now, with that being said, if he comes out in 2024, does it again, I mean, I'm going to look stupid for having him ranked at my number 8. I just really don't think that's going to happen. Like he, I don't know. Like I think he just went on a really good run in 2020, and I don't expect him to keep up with that this next season. That just seems kind of outlandish to me.
I don't blame you for the concern, but I understand there's low investment into Kyron Williams, but the fact is, I think Sean McVay is going to run the wheels off of Kyron Williams. I just ran the math. He had 23 opportunities a game between carries and targets. That is a workload that is just like you don't see running backs get that unless they are Christian McCaffrey. Especially in an offense where you have Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp and even like I guess you could say Tyler Higbee, maybe I don't know, whatever. But that's a lot of freaking touches for a guy it's just so highly concentrated. Like you look at that entire offense, it's so concentrated between Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua in that passing offense that I'm not worried about owning either one of them. Like those two of them are gonna combine for 70% of those targets. Same way with Kyron Williams. Like he is apparently, as I'm running the math, gonna get 30% of like that entire Rams offense. So I understand we see this happen all the time. We saw it with Dameon Pierce, we saw it James Robinson. Right, these guys with very low investment, they have one really good year and they fade out. But it felt like the Rams just let Kyron do everything for their offense last year. Like there wasn't anything that they wanted to sub him out for. He got every goal line touch, every target out of the backfield, every 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, all that stuff. He was on the field for every important snap and especially every fantasy point producing snap. In that offense. So I'm willing to take the gamble on him because that upside is just so high. Like I don't see Kenneth Walker, Saquon Barkley, James Cook, Rachaad White. I don't see any of them having the potential upside to put up that many points per game. I didn't even look at how many points per game it was, but I'm sure it was ridiculous. I would assume probably close to 20. We could pull it up really quick. 21.25 PPR fantasy points per game. That's freaking elite for a running back. So if all I have to give up is a guy like Kenneth Walker, who I'm banking on 14, 15 points a game from, then I'm gonna put Kyron above those guys. So that's my thinking.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's either you're going to be right or you're going to be wrong about Kyron Williams, right? But it's too much of a gamble for me at the moment because, to your point, I mean, we've seen day 3 / undrafted running backs go out, have a massive single year, and then they never really do anything again. Now, granted, Kyron Williams kind of a bit of an outlier in a few ways. One, he had a massive year, not just a good year, a massive year, right? But he's also a 5th round draft pick, 5'9", 100 pounds, right? Not exactly big. Then you brought up James Robinson, you brought up Damian Pierce. I'll bring up Tyler Algier, right? 5th round pick who had over 1,000 yards in his rookie season. It's just not a bet that I'm willing to take. Now, if I'm not getting what I'm asking for in the trade market, then hell yeah, I'll hold on to Kyron Williams and just kind of enjoy whatever production he can bring to me in 2024. But personally, if I have him, I'm going to sell high while I can because I think it is a coin flip as to whether or not he can keep up with it in 2024. And if it's a flip of a coin, I would rather, recoup some assets there. So let's move on to that next tier here. I know we didn't touch base too much on Devon Achane. I personally don't think there's a lot to say about Devon Achane. There's obviously injury risk, but he's a big play waiting to happen. Raheem Mostert is still there. They have been linked to Derrick Henry. There's a lot of questions here, but the fact of the matter is Devon Achane is one of the most explosive players in the National Football League. It's just a matter or not, is he going to get a workload? Can he stay healthy? Things of this nature. So I think everyone has to have Devon Achane in their top 10 running backs. But Tyler, I don't know if you have anything to add on to this before we move into the next tier, but he is a high risk, high reward option.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the guys that can win you a week, any week, and the beautiful thing about Devon Achane is, like you said, I mean, it's not a secret, but he is friggin' explosive. All he needs is 13, 14, 15 touches in a game, and he can give you 30 points, 28 points, and literally 50 points in, his breakout game that he had. I don't expect that to be a frequent thing, but yeah, he's a guy who can win you your week. I think him and Kyron are like, those names are so interchangeable, except for the fact that Kyron might be a little bit heavier. But yeah, I think they're both in the same boat. They can win you your week. You don't feel great about like owning them. I don't think I wouldn't say you don't feel great, but like they don't get you into the tier that Breece Hall, Bijan, and Gibbs do. If you have any of those three running backs, you can use them to trade for someone like a Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, whoever. Once you get down into like, I think even like the ETN to, Kyron range, they don't give you that same name value and that same, liquidity. But they do have that week winning upside that Breece.
Moving into tier 3 here. So we got five running backs here. We got Kenneth Walker, Saquon Barkley, James Cook, Rashad White, and Isaiah Pacheco. Now, number 10 that we have here, Saquon Barkley. You have him at number 13. I have him at number 7. So this is our first really big discrepancy. And admittedly, I just moved Saquon Barkley up this high about an hour ago, right? Because he did go to Philadelphia. Now, before this, I had Barkley probably down in like that 13 to 16 range, if I remember correctly, but he's skyrocketing up. The reason why is because Philadelphia, I mean, I know they just lost Jason Kelce, but they still have a stellar offensive line. Obviously, Saquon probably loses a couple of goal line touchdowns to the tush push, but that is what it is. The fact of the matter is, in the last 2 years, Philadelphia had made DeAndre Swift, when they actually decided to use him, they made him look really, really good. And the year before that, they made Miles Sanders look really, really good, right? So I think Philadelphia is going to keep it up. That's going to be the best running back that's taken a snap for the Eagles in God knows how long, right? So even though he's getting up there in age, even though he does have his injury risks and everything like that, there's just so much to love about Saquon Barkley. Now, I will say this, even though I do have him as my number 7 ranked running back right now, probably not buying him at that cost. Like if I'm not getting that in a return, if I'm not getting somewhere where I would value, RB6 to RB10 in a return, I'm just going to hold and enjoy that production in 20. But I think as of right now, until the hype train on him going to the Eagles simmers down, I don't think he's a buy because you're going to be buying him at his absolute ceiling right now.
A year or two later, in a Dynasty, I don't know, like you should have bought Saquon a while ago. Like everybody knew he was going to be a free agent. He wasn't going to go to a team that was, a dumpster fire. He was probably going to go to a team that's pretty decent and you could just use a running back, like a really good one. And the Eagles definitely made sense. They were one of those teams. But I do think Saquon still has that elite ceiling. I don't think like the goal line is going to be where he makes his money. But like you said, I mean, I think he's a better running back than Miles Sanders and DeAndre Swift. And Miles Sanders was like a top 10 running back the other year. And DeAndre Swift was just like the top 24 guy too. So I think that Saquon's, pretty firmly, there in the top 15. I think he's going to be a good producer. And I mean, it's just hard for me to say that he's going to score more than the guys that I have ranked above him, And there's that, and then there's the fact that he's 27 years old now, going on to his second contract. So we never know really what that's going to look like with these running backs. But I still like Saquon Barkley. I think it is funny that you mentioned that he's the best running back that the Eagles have had, even since like before Brian Westbrook and those guys. That's like a throwback name that, before I even knew fantasy football was a thing, before I knew how to count. But yeah, I like Saquon, but I don't love him enough. I think he's beat up. I think he's got some wear and tear on his body. I think that when you look at a guy like him versus like CMC, like even though they probably have a relatively close ceiling, like CMC is just a lot healthier than Saquon. He's used a lot more efficiently. He's used in a lot more smart ways. So I hope that the Philadelphia Eagles can do that, but I don't have that necessarily that expectation. I could see him finishing as like RB8, RB6 maybe at the top, but I don't think I see him finishing in the RB1, RB2 range like the elite guys have the opportunity to above him.
Yeah, so he seems like he's in a pretty good sell opportunity at the moment, to be honest, despite how highly I have him ranked. And funny enough, in this tier, he's obviously my highest ranked running back, but there is one running back that I personally would consider taking in a quote unquote tier down, maybe even in a 1-for-1. I don't know because it's pretty close. Kenneth Walker on here, right? So you look at James Cook, you look at Rashad White, you look at Isaiah Pacheco. They're all good at something, right? Pacheco is just an angry runner. Rashad White has his PPR upside. James Cook has some good rushing games, some good catching games. He's on an explosive offense, right? But one thing that Kenneth Walker has that the rest of these three doesn't is a very limited threat to his workload, right? Because we saw him go head to head with Zach Charbonnet, and he did not lose a lot of carries at all to Zach Charbonnet. We know the Seattle Seahawks are definitely not going to be adding a running back this offseason because they have spent back-to-back high draft capital on Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. And it's very clearly apparent that Kenny Walker is their, RB1 there. When you look at James Cook, Rashad White, Isaiah Pacheco, I don't think anyone would be surprised to see a running back, whether it be through the draft, whether it be through the tail end of free agency here, right? Obviously, these guys are going to be the 1A on their team no matter who they go out and sign. But there's a world where James Cook is splitting carries. There's definitely a world where Rashad White loses early round or early down carries because, quite frankly, he's a really good pass catcher. He's not a very good running back, in my opinion. And then Isaiah Pacheco, he can catch the ball, but he's definitely not a savant when it comes to it. So Kenny Walker, in my opinion, very safe workload. And I think what we saw in 2023, we can come to expect in 2024, maybe even take a step up a little bit, right, with new head coaching personnel and everything like that. But yeah, so if you're looking at this list, Tyler, so the one that you have ranked the lowest is Isaiah Pacheco, or actually is Saquon Barkley, I should say. But out of these guys is Isaiah Pacheco. Is there really a massive discrepancy between any of these guys for you, or are you kind of in agreement? Like our consensus is working pretty well. This is just one big tier. It's just kind of who do you want a little bit more?
Yeah, this is kind of just like which name do you like really? Which situation, which football team do you like to watch play on Sundays, basically? If you're gonna try to convince me right now and say, oh, James Cook is going to outscore Rashad White next year. Like, there's going to be zero arguments for me right now because I have no idea, and I can say the same thing vice versa about Rashad White versus James Cook. Like, nobody has any idea when it comes to these guys. They're in similar situations. They're getting volume, and you're gonna ride it out for as long as you can. I think the two guys that kind of stand out in the tier, and if I had to, re-rank these guys, I would, as I'm looking at it, I feel like I kind of do feel better about both Kenneth Walker and Isaiah Pacheco over the guys like James Cook and Rashad White, just because like what we witnessed, last year, the Chiefs design plays for Isaiah Pacheco, not just like running the ball. Obviously that's always designed for a running back, but they run a lot of like, little dump offs and clear outs and things like that on 2nd and 10 after incompletions. Like they try to set themselves up and they like to use Isaiah Pacheco. So I think he's going to, be a decent piece of that offense for at least another year or two. And then even seeing with Kenneth Walker last year when he got hurt and they tried to give Zach Charbonnet like a decent workload, it was just like, no, Kenny Walker is just like a head above you. Like sorry, but we wasted that pick on you. We should have, I don't know, bought Deonta Foreman or something like that or whatever, Kenny Walker, I think, is going to be the guy. I think Isaiah Pacheco is going to be the guy. I think those would be the ones that would shock me if something happened in free agency. or the draft rather. But then the rest of the guys, like you said, yeah, I wouldn't be shocked, and they are all one big tier.
Yeah, so let's move into our next tier here. So I think there's not really a whole hell of a lot to add on to that. So I'm looking at our RBs, 14 through 20 here. One big tier, 7 different guys, couple of big discrepancies, but the one guy I think on this entire list in our top 25, there's only one guy that we have at the exact same rank. And it's a guy that hasn't even been drafted into the NFL yet. We have Trey Benson at number, funny enough, we both have him at 15, but the consensus comes out to number 14, averages and all that good stuff. And then 2 spots after that, we have Jonathan Brooks. So 2 undrafted rookies coming in. I think these two are the only 2 running backs that I would probably stake money and guarantee that they will be day 2 draft picks, NFL draft. Obviously, you got guys like, Blake Corum, Will Shipley, Braylon Allen. Those guys could go day 2, but no one's going to be surprised if they fall day 3. I think these two are a virtual lock to go day 2. So I won't theory craft where these guys are going to end up. Obviously, free agency is still going on, but Houston is a great spot that needs a running back still. Dallas is a great spot that needs a running back still, right? There's probably a handful of other spots. Even the Raiders, right? Because the Raiders only have Zamir White at this moment in time. We're recording this at nighttime on day 1 of free agency, so if something's not right there, please excuse that. But yeah, I think that I would rather have these 2 rookie running backs. If I'm not like an immediate contention right now, I would probably take either of these 2 running backs, even over Josh Jacobs, who I personally have at number 11. I was actually just texting our buddy Eric the other day because he was wondering, what should he do with Javonte Williams? Should he go out and get like an early 2nd-round pick? And I said, honestly, there's 2 or 3 rookie running backs that I would rather re-roll over Javonte Williams at this point, just because of where he's at in his career. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So before we really dive into the names that we do know on this list, Trey Benson and Jonathan Brooks, how you feeling about those guys?
Well, I mean, I think the reality is like it doesn't even matter how I feel about them. What matters is like they're gonna get draft capital, and it's gonna take very little for their value to go up. Like if they're drafted, and in day 2, and all of a sudden they put up, 3 games where they're at like 15 points a game, 17 points a game, or whatever. All of a sudden they're gonna be the dynasty RB6, RB7, and like that's kind of what they are to me. That's what these rookie running backs are to me. They're not going to be a Bijan. They're not going to be a Brees where all of a sudden they're at the very top, but they're going to be very tradable and very liquid assets. That's just the case with all rookies. It's just like Josh Jacobs is what he is. Alvin Kamara is what he is. Those prices are pretty locked in. Like people know what they're going to buy and sell those guys for. When it comes to Trey Benson, Jonathan Brooks, like it could go completely either way, either to the ceiling, to the complete floor. But either way, I think like this is the cost that I would pay for a guy like that. Like I'd be willing to lose someone like Josh Jacobs, Alvin Kamara, Javante, DeAndre Swift. Like I'd be willing to let one of those guys go to a 0 to re-roll them on this, because I think the rest of those guys are pretty replaceable. I think we're at the point where like I don't feel great. I don't feel wonderful about starting Josh Jacobs, Alvin Kamara, Javante, any of those guys. So like I will take the re-roll and just hope that they can gain some steam, and maybe I can move them somewhere else. Maybe I really end up loving them and I hold on to them. But the reality is that they can be ascending assets a lot quicker. Honestly, there's no possibility for Josh Jacobs or any of those guys on the list really to be ascending assets at this point. So I think that's where my mindset comes in with them.
See, and I do like Josh Jacobs, especially landing in Green Bay, especially since they went ahead and they released Aaron Jones. Obviously, A.J. Dillon at this moment in time is not coming back. So as of right now, I mean, theoretically, Josh Jacobs has a really big workload heading his way. And there's a lot to like. Green Bay always produces at least one solid running back, but we haven't seen them go with the workhorse load in quite some time. I think it's been about 3 or 4 seasons now. So I'm not going to be surprised if they bring at least someone minor in to back up Josh Jacobs. Like he's definitely going to be the 1A, maybe even the quote unquote workhorse of this offense, but he's not going to be, I would be very surprised if he saw a similar workload to like what Jonathan Taylor sees or what we expect from Bijan and Brees Hall, right? I mean, he's not exactly a young running back. Usually when a running back goes and signs his 2nd contract, if it's with a new NFL team, I mean, if you just look back in history, it doesn't work out a whole bunch, right? Like you got Le'Veon Bell, you got Jerick McKinnon, we got Miles Sanders, like just to name some of the more recent ones, I guess you could say, they don't really do much, right? So I'm not saying Josh Jacobs is going to be bad. And I have him still at my rank 11 for dynasty running backs because I think he can have a really good 20. But to your point, if you're not in immediate contention, I would be just as fine with re-rolling into Trey Benson or Jonathan Brooks than Josh Jacobs. Now, the funny thing is, Josh Jacobs and Alvin Kamara, they are the two most senior guys in this tier for us. I'm 8 spots higher than you on Josh Jacobs. You're 8 spots higher than me on Alvin Kamara. What's the reason behind having Alvin Kamara, still in your top 15 running backs there?
I mean, he just produced more on a points per game basis than Josh Jacobs. I could pull the numbers up right now. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I do know that Kamara was on a points per game basis at least. It looks like he was at 18 points per game this year, while Josh Jacobs was, I don't know if I had to guess, probably around like the 14 point per game. Yeah, exactly at 14 points per game. So I think it's just, the weekly upside. I like Kamara a little bit better, even though there's a chance that he might be a cap casualty. We already know that Josh Jacobs is in a new situation. And, I think just in terms of like playing styles as well, I think Alvin Kamara will age better. I think that he'll have a role on more teams as he ages out versus Josh Jacobs, who's really that bruising back. There's any team can use an Alvin Kamara on third downs, until he's going to be 30 years old. So that's just kind of where my head's at. And there probably isn't that big of a difference between them. Like 5 spots sounds like a lot, but again, like we say, it's all really one big tier and pick your poison here. I just think Kamara has more weekly upside than Josh Jacobs.
Yeah, I guess my big thing is just Josh Jacobs. I mean, he just turned 26 in February. Alvin Kamara is hitting 29 in July, which is obviously not what you want to hear, out of a top tier dynasty running back. But to your point, I mean, there's still a lot to like about Alvin Kamara. And I'll tell you what, as someone who was buying into Kendre Miller last year, Kendre Miller, I mean, granted, he was injured for the most part his rookie season, but he's not a threat to Alvin Kamara, right? Unless Kamara gets hurt, he's not going to cede this backfield to anyone. I don't foresee him being a cap casualty. I think that, I mean, outside of Olave, Alvin Kamara is the only thing on this offense at the moment, right? Like, yeah, you got Rashid Shaheed, who's coming back on an RFA deal, but they're releasing Michael Thomas. Derek Carr is obviously not very good. Jameis Winston is likely not coming back. I mean, uh, I don't know. So I think to your point, there's a lot to like there. Now, before we move out of this tier, two guys that we haven't touched base on yet, DeAndre Swift, Ramondre Stevenson. I am significantly lower on Ramondre than you are. That one's a big discrepancy, especially since they're signing Antonio Gibson. I think Antonio Gibson has definitely the ability to go into New England and be their pass catching specialist. I think New England, I know it's going to be a new coaching staff there, but they do historically like to use a different running back on third downs, and I think that's what Antonio Gibson is going to be. He came out of college, I believe, as a wide receiver, if I remember correctly. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him rolled out on all the third downs where Ramondre's not bad, not a bad pass catcher by any stretch of the imagination, but I can see a true split between these two guys because Antonio Gibson is no slouch. So maybe I'm a little low having him at 29, but I do have a hard time justifying him at RB16. I think that's very rich.
I mean, I think that you just look at what the Patriots would do with any one of their running backs. Like, look what Zeke did at the end of last year. Like, they turned Ezekiel Elliott into a serviceable fantasy running back that could start for you, and you felt pretty good about it. People were buying him for seconds in some spots, thirds in most. But I think that Antonio Gibson hasn't really shown all that much since early on in his career. He obviously got shut out by Brian Robinson last year, and totally ended up second fiddle when it came to that offense. So I think that's pretty much the most that he's going to be there is second fiddle. I still think Ramondre is the guy that they like. He's the guy who's been, getting the majority of the touches in that offense for the last couple of years. And I think worst case scenario, Antonio Gibson is going to just be someone to plug in there when Ramondre needs a rest. I don't think that he's going to be a focal point of the offense. Ramondre was probably seeing, 4 or 5 targets a game last year, and the year prior to that, obviously, he was like a PPR monster. But I think it would be more of a fade off thing than a fall off the cliff type thing with Ramondre, especially just because of how efficient the Patriots have been in the past with their running backs. I know that they're obviously under a new coaching regime and all of that, but Ramondre is still, a clubhouse guy, and I think that he's going to see, a fair workload next year. So it's not with a ton of conviction, but Just knowing that he can catch passes out of the backfield makes me comfortable that like I'm willing to put him as the RB16 when there's not a whole lot of clarity around here. Like he's a guy I know is going to be scoring points. I think as I look at the list, these numbers, like to me, looking at Monty at what do I have him 21 and Ramondre at 16, doesn't feel like there's that big of a gap there. But I've said it once and I'll say it again. It is one big tier, and we're really splitting hairs, and it's a coin flip. If the wind is blowing north today, I'll take Ramondre. If it's blowing south, then maybe he'll be down at RB21 next week. So
Yeah, I think that's a fair call out. Because at this point, I mean, outside of the top five, maybe the top 10 if we're stretching it, right? The running backs, they are all big tiers, and it's just you got to kind of stay fluid and go with whatever situation you prefer. There's not really a right or wrong answer with a lot of these kind of tier three, tier four running backs. It's kind of just, okay, well, who do you personally think is going to luck into or draw the biggest workload for the upcoming season? Because running back is the most reactionary position for dynasty football, right? If you have a bad 4 game stint, you can see a running back go from dynasty RB5 to dynasty RB15 in a matter of 4 or 5 weeks, right? Like it's incredibly reactionary. So it is what it is there. Now let's cap off the video with our final tier here. We've got RBs 21 through 25. Biggest name or biggest faller, I should say, on here, Tajay Spears, man. You still have him at RB20. I have him all the way down at RB38. I was already incredibly low on him. I think I had him at like RB22 or 23. This was before Tony Pollard went and signed there in free agency. I don't think there's a lot to like about Tajay Spears. I think he is at best a change of pace back, maybe plays third downs. He's an injury waiting to happen. I was, not that I had him in anywhere because I didn't draft him anywhere, but anyone who had him at like RB 13, 14, 15, I think that's where he was at in the consensus over the last several weeks. I sincerely hope people kind of, heeded the advice of many and did sell him, because I don't think Tajay Spears, he's going to have a handful of RB2 weeks, I'm sure. But man, I just don't see a world where he returns people, top 15, top 18 running back value. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
I agree with you. I did not know that Tony Pollard went there, and sorry, I had to go and withdraw a couple of trade offers. I was getting Tajay Spears back as like a throw in a couple of places where I was like, I could move him for like a second or a late first or something like that. So I had to go withdraw those really quick. But yeah, so you can just scratch him off the list. He doesn't count. This is just Tyler having a lack of information and a very slow iPhone. But just to look at the list really quick. David Montgomery, I think, he's obviously a goal line guy. He's going to get a touchdown or two if you're lucky in a
Well,
game.
before
maybe
you
a catch or two.
before you continue, I can tell you this: the guy that we have just below Tajay Spears on the consensus, funny enough, he's your 23, but he's my 37, so also a pretty big discrepancy. But out of all people, it's his ex running mate, Derrick Henry. So I'll put in the graphic here. I'll put Derrick Henry on right under Tajay Spears so everyone can see it. But anyway, you were talking about David Montgomery. Go ahead, sorry, buddy.
Yeah, I was talking about David Montgomery. I mean, he's going to be a goal line guy. He's going to get a touchdown or two if you're lucky in a game. And I think the Lions like him. He has a very clear role outlined on that team. Like you're not going to be hoping like, come on, put Montgomery in. We're at the goal line. Like he's going to be on the field. Kind of like we alluded to him before with Jahmyr Gibbs. So we have two top 24 running backs on the same roster, which is kind of interesting. I think that's definitely the only tandem here, but it just goes to show how spread out that backfield's going to be with Monty.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to like about him. I mean, kind of like what we were saying when we were talking about Gibbs earlier on in the video. Monty's going to be there for another 2 years, I would say. I don't see him being dropped prior to that unless something drastic happens this year. He's proven that he is good, and he is the definition of a cheap but effective, productive, whatever you want to call him, RB2 for Dynasty. So there's nothing wrong with still being high on David Montgomery. I mean, admittedly, having him at 28, me personally, even that might be a little bit low. But again, it's all tiers, right? James Conner, though, that's a guy you and I last year, we were both kind of targeting James Conner to be kind of a low end RB2. He definitely returned RB2, numbers. I think Arizona, they have not yet, at least, signed a big name in free agency. And I wouldn't be surprised if they end up being the ones that maybe take Trey Benson or Jonathan Brooks, Blake Corum, Braylon Allen. Like, I'm not going to be surprised if Arizona spends, a round 3 or round 4 pick on a running back because they do have a ton of assets despite having a ton of needs. But I do think what that means is James Conner is probably safe for 2024 at the very least, and he has been producing. The Arizona offense is going to take a step up. Trey McBride has stepped up. Kyler Murray's back in full swing, and they're very likely taking a wide receiver at pick number 4, which is all going to be a direct beneficiary for the run game in James Conner. So I think we should fully expect, at least a top 18, top 19 season out of James Conner with a handful of spike weeks. So he's a guy who, I'm not in the business of buying running backs at this point in the offseason unless it's a top tier guy. If you're really looking forward and you're going to need an RB2 for 2020, it might not be a bad idea to kick the tires on James Conner because there is the fear that Arizona is going to draft a running back. But even if they do, I don't think he's beating James Conner out for the RB1 load, at least not in 2024. So I think now, as weird as it is to say, out of all people on this list, I think you could buy low on James Conner and reap the rewards for 2024.
I'll just say I've tried to buy James Conner. I've tried to overpay for James Conner, and can't happen. I might sound like an idiot. I tried to send 2 second-round picks for James Conner because I was like, fuck it, like that. He's the only running back that's available. Nobody will sell me a running back, so I'm gonna go overpay for a guy that I like, and that was snap rejected. So even though Keep Trade Cut might tell you that's the value, it might not be true in your league. However, that doesn't mean you don't go send the trade. I think James Conner has always been a buy low for the last 3 years. He's not you're preaching to the choir when it comes to James Conner for me. He's always been a buy and will be probably until he retires because he is a hammer running back when he's healthy.
Yeah, now let's look at Austin Eckler and Jaylen Warren. So for what it's worth, with Austin Eckler, I don't love that he ended up in Washington. I definitely don't love that for Brian Robinson. I did previously have Brian Robinson, I think around RB20, give or take. But he's moved down to my RB26 as a result. As you can see in the graphic, I'm still not necessarily high on Austin Eckler. I have him at 30. You have him at 25. But fact of the matter is, this tier, if you're going to take a swing for the fences, I mean, Eckler is the only one on this list. Well, that's not necessarily true because we've seen RB1 seasons out of Montgomery and James Conner. But Austin Eckler is the most recent top 5 running back finisher. And I'm not saying that he's going to magically revive in Washington. I'm not saying that he's going to bounce back from the honestly horrid year that he had in 2020, but he does have a lot of opportunity there. Now, if he takes on the Antonio Gibson role, not the Antonio Gibson role of 2023, but the Antonio Gibson role of 22 and 21, splitting those carries with Brian Robinson could work out. I mean, I don't know if you can justify what people are going to charge for Austin Eckler because of the name value, but it could do something in 2024, I guess.
He's definitely going to be a hit or miss guy. I mean, he's definitely one I'm crossing my fingers for because I'm kind of like holding the bag on him a little bit. But like as your RB2, like I don't have any problem starting James Conner and just hoping that he puts up like a 15 or 17 point game. I know that he's slow. I know that he doesn't have the RB3 ceiling that he used to have, but like I'm fine with him. He still has a name and I think he's definitely going to get work in Washington. They're going to be in a new situation. Rookie quarterback, hopefully, ideally, right? They didn't sign anybody today, right? Washington, no quarterbacks.
They
Right?
signed Austin
So
Eckler. That was it.
yeah, but no quarterbacks, right? There's no quarterback over there. So yeah, I think rookie quarterback with pass catching, or at least used to be pass catching running back. Is a good recipe for peppering of targets. So I'll definitely take my shot on him at this price, and like you're not missing out on too much if you're looking at Jaylen Warren or Derrick Henry or these guys. So.
Yeah, and to end the video off here, we'll just talk briefly about the Pittsburgh Steelers running back tandem because I have Jaylen Warren all the way down at 36. You have him at 22. I have Najee Harris at 21. And I don't believe you gave me a rank for Najee Harris. I'm going to assume that he's probably outside of your top 30. So we're kind of wishy-washy on these two guys between Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. The fact of the matter is, they're both going to continue probably a very similar role to what they saw in 2024. Art Smith is going to come in, be the offensive coordinator. We know what he did with Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. Probably going to do that with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. Jaylen Warren's got more PPR upside. Najee Harris probably has more touchdown upside. Whether you want to have Jaylen Warren at RB24 or Najee Harris at RB24, honestly, it makes no difference to me. They're probably going to be very similar producing assets and a very weird offense for 2020. And aside from what I just said, I don't think there's really anything else I can add to talk about the Steelers backfield. So all of these guys in this tier, if you can get any of them, maybe for like, if you know you're going to be contending, like if you know for a fact you're going to be contending, I would be fine with sending maybe like a mid second round pick for any of these guys at this point in the offseason, but kind of keep in mind that things could change, right? It's not going to get worse for David Montgomery. It's not going to get worse for Austin Eckler, Najee Harris, or Tajay Spears. We know what's going to go on with those guys. Kind of tread lightly on James Conner because a shoe could drop in Arizona, right? They could bring in someone to legitimately compete against him. But again, if I'm going to be buying running backs at this point in the offseason, it's going to be these extremely low cost assets in this 20 to 25 range personally, because those are going to be the guys that I'm going to buy the lowest for right now, and they could offer the largest return in the 2024 season. If I want someone higher on this list that's not in the top 3, top 4, I would wait. I would wait, or I would sell them personally.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, like most of these guys should be able to be bought for a second. You know, it's funny. There's some leagues that we play in, like I could send you a second for David Montgomery and you snap reject. But if you send me, you wouldn't send me a second for David Montgomery. Like it's funny. It's finicky how some leagues work. But yeah, you should be able to go get your hands on these guys for a much smaller price tag than the guys at obviously in the top 8, like, and significantly, like exponentially more cheap, and that's kind of why I love taking a million shots at guys in this range, because odds are they're probably going to come close to the guys that are at the top, or at least one or two of them.
Yeah. So, I mean, at this point in the offseason, running backs, super weird to talk about, right? It's a weird time to buy. It's a weird time to sell. It's just weird in general for running backs. I will say, if you have any running backs on your roster that were big winners or big perceived winners as a result of free agency, I'm talking about, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, so on and so forth. Not a bad idea to kick the tires and see what you can get in the trade market, despite me having those guys specifically at number 7 and number 11, because I would easily sell those guys for a return for what I could perceive, the RB7 or RB11 would get me. I think in a future video, maybe next week, we'll probably do the same thing with wide receivers. Probably more to talk about with the wide receivers, because the dynasty wide receiver landscape is probably the most fun thing to navigate, especially at this point in the offseason, right? Because there's a lot less volatility and a lot more, it's a lot easier to project, right? With those dynasty wide receivers. So definitely excited to talk about that. But Tyler, before we wrap this up today, any closing remarks?
Yeah, I greatly look forward to talking about the wide receiver market over the running back market so that my brain doesn't go numb. I'm just pulling up Keep Trade Cut right now. The wide receiver 20 on Keep Trade Cut is Michael Pittman. So that's definitely a lot more fun to talk about than Ramondre Stevenson, who was our, consensus RB20. But yeah, we'll get into that next week. It was definitely fun. We went through the whole thing. Anybody who's got value to their name, we talked about, and we gave our 2 cents on that guy and their situation. So if you liked what we had to say, great. If you didn't, then even better, because that means you might comment. So thanks.
No, and it's just funny before I close up that out of all people, you happen to bring up Michael Pittman, who's the wide receiver 20 on KTC, but we were alluding to potentially trading, our consensus RB5 Travis Etienne for him straight up, right? Like that's how big of a value discrepancy there is between running back and wide receiver right now, and rightfully so, in my opinion. And we'll talk a bit more about that in next week's video. But for myself, for Tyler, for Goal Line Dynasty, we will see you guys next time.